Yes, sir. You're done? Thank you, gentlemen. There's no one listed here to testify or wish to testify, and the committee will conclude the public hearing on Bill 270. The committee will continue to receive testimony up until Friday, and address your written testimony to the Committee on Education, Finance, Taxation. Submit via email, Senator Joe S. @gmail.com. My office located in Rand Care Building, second floor, Suite 3, 761 Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to Bill 271, correct? 274 and 271. On Bill 274, that would be introduced by Senator Fernando Esteves, an act to add a new section 26203K37 to Article 2, Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code Annotated, relative to exempting the OVIS fees collected by Safety Inspection Station on behalf of the government from being applied to the gross income for the purpose of assessing business privilege tax. And on Bill 271-34, introduced by Senator Mike Nicholas, an act to repeal subsection C of 26702, Article 7 of Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code Annotated, relative to preventing additional burdens to consumers for higher prices of online purchases and limited access to online markets. For Bill 274, the following individuals have signed in is, let's see, Mr. Wonju Kim and Bob Braun. Bob, are you here? Braun? No. You have to leave? Okay, you would sit there and then, well, you're the only one, then I'll call the other two gentlemen right after. Sir, Senator Esteves, would you please, the author of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 274-34 does something quite simple. I wouldn't even say that it provides an exemption. It just writes, I think, something that we've kind of glared over. So what the OVIS fee is, the vehicle inspection service fee that goes to funding vehicles and maintenance of the Guam Police Department. What that is, it's the $15 we pay when we renew our vehicle registration. What happens, though, is that the service station inspectors who do this on behalf of the government are assessed the GRT at the full 15, even though they remit a portion of that directly to the government of Guam. So what Bill 274-34 proceeds to do is ensure that they're only paying the GRT on the portion that they actually receive, not the entirety of what's collected on behalf of the people of Guam, or the government of Guam. That's a $3 portion. So the $3 portion that's remitted, they won't be paying. So they'll be paying the GRT on the $12, but not on the portion on the $15 in totality.
All right, thank you. Sir?
Thank you. Yeah, just to echo what Senator Esteves said. Anyway, my name is Wonju Kim. I represent Mars Corporation. We are a safety inspection station here on Guam. Safety inspection fees have not been raised since 2007. So since 2007, the fee has been $15. Of that $15, we, in essence, are collecting $3 for the government of Guam, which we remit as an OVIS fee that's used, as Senator Esteves mentioned, for the funding of police vehicles and their maintenance. Because of the way the law was drafted, and I've run this by the accountant because it seemed unfair that we'd be paying GRT on the $3 that we collect for the government of Guam, but because of the way the law is drafted, it means that we have to pay GRT, which we have been doing for the last 10 years, essentially paying GRT on a portion of the fee that is not ours to keep, that is remitted to the government of Guam. So it's just a matter of, I think, fairness and common sense that Bill 274-34 be passed to right this wrong. I just wanted to say one other thing is this actually came out of discussions that we had with Bill 188, which would have raised the safety inspection fees, and I know there's a lot of concern about fees being raised. That said, again, our fees have not been raised since 2007, which has meant that we have had to bear the cost of increases in operations, rent, water, power, you know the drill. So Bill 188 would have raised the fee to $25, $10 of which would have gone for OVIS, for much needed funds for police, for the financing of police vehicles. So the extra $3, we would have gotten an extra $3, and I would urge you all to revisit that bill if possible. I understand there isn't support, but the safety inspection station operators need that bump up because it's been 10 years that we've been operating at the same level. And also, just in the interest of public safety, it would be a nice additional source of revenue for public safety.
All right, thank you, but we're not addressing that, but thank you for that information.
Yes.
The senator is still holding it. Does any of my colleagues have any question for Senator Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're looking to make OVIS fees exempt from the business privilege tax.
Yes, correct. So of the $15 that we collect, that's a safety inspection fee, we retain 12,
Right.
and we remit $3 to the government of Guam. And we've been
Right.
paying GRT on that $3.
See, I don't even think it should be considered as a component of gross income. I think that creating it as an exemption creates the impression that the fee is a part of your gross income, but the reality is that it isn't.
That's
if anything, I think the bill should instead of creating an exemption for the fee from being considered as a part of gross income, I think it just needs to be clarified that notwithstanding any of the provision of law, OVIS fees shall not be considered as a component of gross income.
I think that's
the proper way to go about
Yep,
doing this.
I would
instead
agree with that.
of making an exemption for the fee, because the fee is not income. So I'll work with the author and the committee on perhaps amending I'm just putting on the record, Mr. Chairman, because it would technically be a substantive change. But I think that the way this needs to be written is that it just needs to be specified as an act that we codify that the fee is not considered a component of gross income. I don't think we should exempt a fee
That
from
makes sense. I mean, that works for us.
tax. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any other senators have anything? Because I'm in agreement of that. It's similar to what they do for banks, not their net or gross, their net when it comes to taxes. Senator Steves, do you want to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for the contribution, and I look forward to their recommendations and their assistance, especially of the committee and their expertise in finances and how that relates to statutory writing with regards to this bill. That is actually the intent, and I would like the record to reflect that I would prefer that the gross accurately reflect what you actually retain as part of your service to the government. So thank you for that contribution. Thank you for your indulgence, and thank you for your Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You see, there's no further individuals to testify. Would you call Mr. Ken Guerrero in and Andre, if they're still here? Or we're going to move to 271? Okay, we'll now hear testimony on Bill 271. And you go ahead and speak about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief opening statement on 271. This is a bill to exempt online purchases from the application of any sales tax. This bill was actually introduced as a stopgap measure, Mr. Chairman, in the event that Bill 262 does not pass, or if it does pass and gets vetoed, is unable to be overridden. So I just wanted to put on the record that Bill 271 will not be moving forward until such time that the outcome of Bill 262 is determined. If we are able to pass that and repeal the sales tax, this bill will not be necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. We don't have anyone testifying, but I will continue to receive testimony on both bills. We will now proceed to, we're moving along quite well tonight. Bill I guess these are the fun bills. Bill 264, introduced by Senator Regine Lee. She's not present tonight, but I wanted to make sure that her bill was given still the appropriate amount of time. An act to add new section 26705 to Article 7 of Chapter 720 of Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code annotated as added by Public Law 34-87, relative to exempting basic need products from the general sales tax, and to cite this act as the Working Families Relief Act. Also, we have Bill 263-34 as introduced by Senator Fernando Barcines or Senator Stevas, an act to amend Section 26702 of Section 1 of Public Law 34-87 relative to adding the definition to the same to add a new Section 26705 to Section 1 of Public Law 34-87 relative to collections of the general sales tax to add a new Section 26706 to Section 1 of Public Law 34-87 relative to establishing further exemption to the general sales tax to add a new Section 26707 to Section 1 of Public Law 34-87 relative to exempt goods purchased outside of Guam for delivery to Guam for non-business purpose from the use tax, and to add Section 26708 to Section 1 of Public Law 34-87 relative to bundle transaction of taxable and untaxable sales. And we also have Bill 262-34. Ooh, like I tell you, these are the fun bills. As corrected by the prime sponsor, as introduced by Senator Michael Nicholas, an act to repeal Section 1, 3, 4, 16, 17, and 18, and to amend Section 2, all of Public Law 34-87 relative to repealing the imposition of a general sales tax on Guam. Let me read off the names, because generally, the same folks that signed up for one bill signed up for the other bills. Let's see. Yes. Yeah, I know each one of you to open first. Okay, we're going to start with, I'm going to call the names for 264 first. Okay, I don't know if Mr. Kennedy Younggrove is still here, and Mr. Andre, but we do have Mr. John Camacho. Oh, Peter John Camacho. Please come up, sir. And we have Dr. Duenas and Ms. Benita Manglonia. And if I'm correct, so I got their names here. 264. Right. I'm just going to go down the list on this one. I also have them for 263. And I also have them, I got you a package deal, right, from Dr. Peter John, I got you for all three bills, right? Mr. Camacho? I got you in all three bills. All three of you for all three bills, right? Okay, great. And then I also have, I'm almost sure I saw Senator Klitsky on the list here. Are you sure, Senator Klitsky, you signed the right sheet? Just thought I'd ask you that question. Oh, you signed as Bob. That's, I thought that was BOG, for Bank of Guam or something, so I was looking for somebody from the bank, No, not a problem, Senator. But, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is, because you're all testifying actually for all three bills, I will ask, Senator Lee's not here, but just to let you folks know, we're going to hear these same three next week on the 11th, okay? Yes, we did. And then the authors asked for an additional public hearing, so I'm going to give them. I'll give them as many as they believe they need. I've got all the time, up till midnight. Then we start all over. But we'll do it again on the 11th. So, but all your testimony will be kept. You don't all have to come back again, okay? And we'll start with, well, it'd be you, Senator Barcinas, Esteves, that would introduce your bill, and then I'll have Senator Snickles introduce his bill, and we'll start with, coincidentally, Senator Kliski, you'll be first as you're listed, but this is after the two senators have opened their bill, okay?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
can we just discuss the order of bills? What bill are we doing right now?
It'll be-
Esteves bill number
His is 63,
63.
but we're going to hear all
263.
three because all four,
So we're going to hear all three concurrently?
right, they're-
Okay, cool.
yeah, so that
mean,
they're all
yes.
going to speak about the same thing. They like it or they don't like it. But hold on, Senator Esteves, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Bill 263-34 was reflective of my version of the sales tax that I had written and submitted to the body for consideration. I just want to be very clear. I am a proponent of a sales tax. I believe that we should be converting from the GRT. I want to be very clear with that. However, I want to make sure that the record reflects that I've been very consistent that if done, a sales tax needs to be done right and time needs to be taken. And I believe that it was very important, Mr. Chairman, that a sales tax have in place exemptions necessary to ensure that it does not have a severe impact on the public. Now, to highlight some of the items that we were looking to exempt were food products, prescription medications, baby products, at the request of one of my colleagues, feminine hygiene products, which I do support, adult incontinence products, so necessities for our community that I don't believe we should be taxing. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, further, based on research looking at other jurisdictions and in communication with members of the community, other things that maybe don't seem very important to others, such as casual sales, whether it's going to the flea market, should not be subject to the sales tax as it is in law, as well as very key exemptions that should have been in existence before the passage of the bill, such as federal exemptions that we're not able to tax the federal government, but that should be clear in our own law, as well as not taxing our own government, Mr. Chairman, so as those tangible personal property used to develop property of the government of Guam, that we're not taxing businesses who would have to pay the sales tax providing a service for us, as well as other things to support policy that we've already had, such as exemptions on real property transactions assessed on property under $400,000 to encourage the development of residential homes. That being said, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to go into the bill too much. I just want the record to be very clear that I've been trying, my office and myself have been trying to make attempts with Department of Revenue and Taxation with regards to getting figures and numbers that only they have access to, so that we can ascertain more concretely what the number would be like based on estimates with sales tax exemptions in place, primarily on some of the larger items that get purchased more often, such as food items and baby products and prescription medications that we were looking at to exempt from the sales tax. But I would like it to be known that we have not received any word, any correspondence, regardless of numerous attempts and letters sent, hand-delivered to Department of Revenue Taxation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I make the request that I pull Bill 263-34 from consideration now and further, and would like the record to reflect that I am full support of a repeal of the sales tax, and not to waste the people's Guam time anymore with Bill 263-34. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Esteves. In this regard, because Senator Esteves has officially withdrawn for consideration by the body at this time of Bill number 263-34 COR, we are gonna proceed with the opening comments from the author of Bill number 262-34, and then we'll open up the discussion, beginning with Senator Bob, on any of the three measures that are before the body. Senator St. Nicholas?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Acting Chairman. First of all, I need to make a amendment in limiting.
I'm sorry, Senator Bob, if I may. I need Senator St. Nicholas to just explain, because we are entertaining the two measures simultaneously. So
Yes.
if he can open up with his description of his proposal, and then I will entertain.
I remember there was a time when when senators came to listen to witnesses instead of witnesses coming to listen to senators, but I guess that was then and this is now, so I'll hold off.
Thank you for your understanding, Senator Bob. Senator St. Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Klitsky. Just real quick, just so we can understand what we're talking about on 262. It's a full repeal of the sales tax, not a partial repeal. I appreciate Senator Esteves withdrawing his Bill 263. I understand that his support now is also with Bill 262, and the votes are coalescing around it. But yes, Bill 262 is a full repeal of the sales tax that's slated to go into effect on October 1. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator St. Nicholas, and thank you, Senator Bob, for your patience, just so that, in fact, our viewers have the opportunity to understand what is before the body. Senator Bob Klitsky, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. First of all, I need to make a amendment in limine to my testimony. I've misidentified Speaker Cruz as the chairman of this honorable committee. And second, apparently there is a leak in my operations somewhere, which will become apparent when one compares what Senator Esteves said with my testimony. So I'm going to have to figure out if I can plug that leak. But my testimony follows. Honorable Chairman and members of the Committee on Taxation and Adjudication, I, Robert Klitsky, come before you to oppose Bills 34-263 and 264. I submit that Bill 262 provides a complete solution to the sales tax problem. To fine-tune that which should be cast off can't be seen as an effective undertaking. Sponsors are encouraged to disengage from these bills, support Bill 34-262, and stand by to override if necessary. So apparently, either there's a leak or Senator Esteves and I have a telepathic connection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should I proceed straight to 262? Yes, all right. Honorable Chairman St. Augustine and honorable members of the Committee on Taxation and Adjudication, I, Robert Klitsky, come before you to support Bill 34-262. I address a couple threshold matters before proceeding to policy analysis. First, I must pay tribute to Microsoft Word software and its search and replace feature. Had it not been for that feature, I would have been faced with the grueling task of going through and correcting many of my political templates, which center on phrases such as tax and spend Democrats. Thanks to that salutary Microsoft Word feature, I need only search for Democrats and replace it with Republicans, like this: tax and spend Republicans. It's a fine day. Democrats are now candidates for the sober-cut fiscal conservatives, while the GOP is in the running for the title fiscal profligates. And of course, this all goes back to November 21, 2014, when acting Governor Ray Tenorio, ably assisted by the Juan Pat 10, perpetrated on the people of Guam what Andrew Bainum identified as this great salary smash and grab. That's when it started. Second, I'm surprised that Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio has not mooted out the necessity for this hearing. Friday's Guam Post reported in an article entitled "Tenorio Reverses on Sales Tax" as follows: after his administration's fierce lobbying for the implementation of a sales tax, Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio on Thursday announced he will support a repeal of the sales tax. If Tenorio played to type using a 5-step process patterned after the one he used on November 21, 2014, one, as the acting governor, would call the legislature into special session. Two, he'd send a bill repealing the sales tax to this legislature. Three, he'd enlist the services of former Speaker Judy Wonpat to counsel your Speaker on the means for avoiding the strictures of 2 GCA Section 2103 to demonstrate how she moved forward sans public hearing and how she avoided the Section 2103 requirement that she, quote, certifies that emergency conditions exist involving danger to the public health or safety. The requirement for a public hearing may be waived. She'd have a heavy burden doing that because it's very clear that the current Speaker of this legislature is not going to do such a thing. Four, enlist the services of Senators Rodriguez and Morrison, the last unreconstructed members of the Wonpat 10 still serving, to urge prompt passage of the repealer, you do it in about an hour or so, and sign the bill immediately upon receipt, thereby deep-sixing the sales tax in less than 1 day. There would have been no need for this hearing, but that was then and this is now. The Tenorio Wonpat 10 shenanigan put money in Tenorio's pocket. Using the same maneuver now would actually put money in the people's pocket. It's a big difference. So much for the two threshold matters. Now for the administration's fierce lobbying for the implementation of a sales tax. After being exposed to serial special sessions bracketed by attempted executive tours de force employing the virtual relocation of the hospital, that is, much of the staff sporting white coats and black armbands, stuffing this room repeatedly, fatalistic rhetoric morbidly complemented by the deployment of a hearse, the closing of police and fire stations, parks and pools for at least dramatic effect, if not coercion, punctuated by the governors sitting at the rear of this hall, is shaming this body generally and some members in particular, plus asking for resignations. For that, my respect and affection for canines and equines limits my ability to assign the appropriately graphic street term for the cluster fumble that the governor and the GMH leadership have subjected the people to. Call it fierce lobbying. The object of the cluster fumble was for the number crunchers to persuade the members of this legislature that the fiscal situation of the government was so dire that instant action was required to, quote, just get through the crisis. The theatrics from GMH were meant to shock us and show us that if only the hospital had a dedicated funding source, a fiscally responsible, medically skilled facility would emerge. Superintendent of Education John Fernandez got his oar in and was rewarded for pandering to the governor by supporting the sales tax, rewarded with a promise of 0.25% of the increased revenue gleaned by the sales tax for, quote, capital improvement needs. The 0.25% for capital improvement needs language splits the difference between illusory and precatory. Section 5 of Bill 238-34 gave the governor a tremendous tool to use to reduce expenditures and make the government more efficient by enacting 5 GCA Chapter 1A reorganization. That legislation, an abundance of salutary suggestions, and the governor's own lip service on cutting costs produced the yield set out below. That's it. Nothing. Nothing at all. Contrast what the governor did with all that we've learned since 248 passed. One, many taxes have not been collected. Two, there has been no cost cutting. Rather, government employment has increased. Three, TED Talks. A magazine article, the subtitle of TED Talks is Former GMH Administrator Reveals Power Struggles, Connivances, and Possible Double-Dipping by Physicians. So one, many taxes are not collected. Two, there's been no cost cutting, rather government employment has increased. Three, TED Talks. Four, Tropocalypse. Five, there has been no attempt to economize whatsoever. Six, greater efficiency in government operations was apparently irrelevant. In the final analysis, the real message from Adelup was, quote, increase taxes to get us through this crisis and make sure that you give us enough so that we can continue doing what we've always done. No change, but the people will have to pay more so that we can, well, business as usual. The remedy is apparent. Pass Bill 34-262 post haste. And in the process, you needn't shed any tears for GMH or GDOE. John Fernandez abandoned his role as champion of the children and leader of education when he came here and jumped into the political maelstrom to pander to the governor by addressing tax policy, vice the matters clearly within his charter. The 0.025% reward is evidenced by such weak language that it cannot be said to have the consistency of even firm Jell-O. Although he has tried to divest himself from them, the provisions of the Every Child Act give the superintendent a full quiver of statutory and judicial arrows to aim at public officials who would attempt to tear down the primacy of his department. That statutory strength was buttressed by the passage of this very law, which made it clear that with a priority number of 101, the Department of Education is the top priority of this government. GMH, using a script borrowed from Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, managed to go from the agency we wanted to love to one that we can now barely tolerate. The GMH venture into the political whirlpool was a disaster. GMH can start rebuilding its credibility by forswearing any role in the formation of tax policy and concentrate on health care. Tell us what's wrong at the hospital, why, and how it must be fixed. And you would ignore the TED Talks at your peril. Tell us what you need to provide an adequate standard of care and how much it will cost. But if you insist on casting GMH as a political football, don't be surprised if GMH gets kicked. It is submitted that considerations re GDOE and GMH are de minimis vis-a-vis the remedial initiative before you. I respectfully request that you pass this bill forthwith and stand by for the override. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now proceed to Peter John. then Dr. Duenas, and then Ms. Manglona. Ms. Manglona, do you have a presentation you're going to present, or no?
I just have 4 slides.
Okay. So
It'll be fast.
so Peter John, would you want to go first, or you want her and then you're going to speak? No, you're first written, so you be first, okay, because you're the administrator anyway. Okay, proceed.
Buenas noches, Senor Chairman and members of the Comité. My name is Peter John Camacho, Hospital Administrator of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and I am presenting testimony on Bills 262-34 and 264-34 that either will repeal in its entirety the 2% sales tax or add on exemptions to items that would not be subject to taxation. Over the past many months, there has been a great deal of conversation on the needs of the GMHA. Generally, there is a sense of agreement that something must be done to assist the hospital. These discussions have established that there is a need to ensure the hospital has access to a dedicated funding source to meet these operational shortfalls. Over the last several years, the operational shortfalls average about $30 million. This underfunding, however, goes back many years. Repealing the sales tax in its entirety would continue the many challenges we have when critical vendors are not paid timely. These problems we encounter include credit holes until accounts are paid and made current. We encounter a higher cost for supplies and medication when we need to procure the same items from another source different from the original vendor because of the credit hold. We defer maintenance on our facilities and critical hospital equipment. We push the recommended limits of the manufacturer's recommended useful life of capital equipment and hold off on implementation of other critical projects. Bill 262-34 proposes to repeal critical sections of Public Law 34-87 that essentially provides revenue to the Government of Guam, the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and the Guam Department of Education by implementation of a sales tax. This is a serious concern, especially to the hospital, which faces funding challenges, especially because of its patient-payer mix. Likewise, our colleagues in the Guam Department of Education will face similar issues in maintenance of its aging facilities. Without a dedicated funding source, forward positive movement will come to a halt because the current condition is not changed. Addition of exemptions on items would affect the amounts of revenues that could be collected, reducing the amounts of funds available in the dedicated funding source. While less impacting than a total repeal of the sales tax, it will still have an effect on our ability to carry out the GMH's mission of providing quality patient care in a safe environment by having to scale back different projects to try to accomplish more with a smaller amount of monies. Besides the GMHA, there would be similar impact to the Government of Guam and the Guam Department of Education with less revenues collected. A fact well known to many is the worldwide shortage of nurses, especially in critical areas such as the intensive care critical care unit, the emergency department, medical telemetry, and other healthcare professionals such as pharmacists, therapists, and technologists across many specialties. A dedicated fund source would provide GMH with opportunities to develop a more competitive compensation package to attract these professionals to our island and, more importantly, retain them as employees. A dedicated funding source would provide resources to the hospital to better plan for upgrades to diagnostic equipment. The end result would be better patient outcomes because the hospital staff were able to quickly identify the dis-ease condition and provide the treatment and care timely so that there would be less disability outcomes for patients. We are at a critical time. The recently enacted into law sales tax is an opportunity to provide additional revenues to the Government of Guam and a dedicated funding source to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority and the Guam Department of Education. As recently as 2 weeks ago, a conversation with a local radio host indicated his support for a committed fund source for the hospital but he disagreed on the matter of its implementation. Fair enough, but the hospital's needs remain. We cannot go back to a one-hospital community. We need to ensure that the same standard of medical care is provided across all hospitals for our people. We cannot return to the acrimonious debate of the recent past. I respectfully request this august body to please give the sales tax a chance to be implemented and the allocation of those funds to the respective agencies and the government of Guam to be made. We need to continue positive movement forward. Por respeto.
Dr. Duenas, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Vince Duenas, GMH Medical Director. I'm going to give a Reader's Digest brief. I think we've been here several times, and I just wanted to kind of set the, every time I've come down, I've always mentioned that I will first begin with the mission statement for GMH. And again, just to remind us that although we have current challenges in our only public and safety net hospital for our people, the mission statement for GMH continues to be to provide quality patient care in a safe environment. We have been sharing with you for months that our hospital needs a dedicated funding source for its annual underpayment for its mandate to treat all patients regardless of the ability to pay. And this consistent underpayment has forced our hospital to be in a constant crisis management, trying to deal with daily struggles in replenishing life-saving supplies, medications, equipment, daily struggles to expand and improve existing technology and medical services, daily struggles to try to recruit and retain critical professional staff. Now, this threatens to harm our hospital in delivering standard of care and better patient outcomes. Without this dedicated funding source, I fear, as has happened in over the last 40 years, is that our political leaders will continue to respond to our ill-funded hospital with a Band-Aid approach. In medicine, a Band-Aid approach is a low-quality treatment. It addresses only the symptoms and does little to address the root cause of the illness, and the patient continues to suffer and eventually succumb to the disease. A Band-Aid approach is like putting a Band-Aid over a severed artery. It's like putting a Band-Aid over an abscess that needs to be drained and given IV antibiotics. And likewise, a Band-Aid approach to our ill-funded hospital addresses symptoms of financial burden. You see the symptoms every day. You see the symptoms of lack of supply, not able to pay vendors, not able to get supplies because they don't honor GMH because of its lack of funding in history. The symptoms of lack of equipment, the symptoms of lack of technology, the symptom of lack of critical professional, the symptom of poor performance in regulatory surveys, the symptom of unfunded budget requests. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Handing out dollars from time to time as a Band-Aid approach in time of crisis does little to mitigate and address the root cause, and that to us, or to me, is the annual underpayment for the mandate given to GMH to treat all who come to its door regardless of its ability to pay. Now, this underpayment is, if you take a deep dive, as we have done, this is the massive monster iceberg, and if not addressed by a dedicated funding source, it will sink our hospital and the future health care of our people. So we are facing a crisis. We are at a crossroads, and there is a price to pay. But what price do you put on the health care and lives of our people? What price do you put on providing our hospital with a facility or with the supplies, the equipment, the medications to heal and restore the sick, to decrease the suffering of the sick, to save lives, to provide comfort care to the dying. I think it's priceless. And it should be a shared burden for all of us. And we must be willing to give sacrificially to meet the health care of our people. So we are at a crossroads. We're at a fork. And one road is to provide GMH with a dedicated funding source. I believe that that will be life-saving and life-sustaining to our hospital and our people. It will enhance and expand existing medical services and technology. It will provide standard of care and better patient outcomes. It will help our hospital sustain its financial health posture in the years to come. The other road is do not provide GMH with a dedicated funding source. I believe that road will abandon GMH to a slow death. It will abandon GMH to a mediocre, low-quality health care. It will abandon GMH to daily struggles with crisis management to provide standard of care. And you know, public health care is a civic and moral obligation for our political leaders. I agree, it is not a political game. And we're looking up to you tonight, and as we've always have over the months, and we beseech you to demonstrate your moral conviction to give life to GMH and give hope to GMH and our people. Our desires that you advance and defend the cause of our hospital. And our desires that could be, and our thoughts is that could be accomplished by finding a dedicated funding source to our shortfalls. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Manglona,
Yes, thank you.
have you coordinated for the slides?
Yes, please.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, so just want to say, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, my name is Benita Manglona, Chief Financial Officer of Guam Memorial Hospital. About a month ago, I appeared before you for the first set of hearings for Bills 262, 263, and 264. And Mr. Chairman, you stated earlier that we don't have to be here at every hearing, but I think it's very important that we continue to come so you can hear from the hospital the needs of GMH. My position has not changed from a month ago. I am not supporting any efforts to take away funding from GMH. Passage of Bill 248-34 now, Public Law 34-87, didn't just happen overnight. It was passed after a marathon of favorable testimonies from doctors, nurses, employees, and other supporters. It appears there's still some who do not understand why GMH needs a dedicated funding source, and I think it is important to understand the GMH finances, and that's why I have that very short PowerPoint, and I have above there the payer mix of GMH. About 50, based on fiscal year 2017, about 55% of our payer mix is what we call the 3 M's: Medicare, Medicaid, and the medically indigent, which for the last 5 years I've reimbursed GMH about 46% of what we bill. And then for the self-pay, it's about 13%. So if you have close to 70% of your patient mix reimbursing the hospital at 46% or 42%, and then you have the insurance that reimburses 71%, how long do you think GMH can last? How long do you think a business can operate? This is the reason why GMH needs help. we incur millions of dollars in underpayment, under reimbursement, and uncompensated care. And if you please move to the next slide. Next, please. This slide, we provided this slide to CMS. I was recently at a meeting with Region 9, pushing to get adjustment money for GMH for 2014 and 2015. If you look at the red line, that's the cost of patient care, to provide care to Medicare patients. And then the green line there is that the reimbursement for the U.S. hospitals for Medicare patients, for like hospitals same size as GMH. And then the blue line is that's what GMH is being reimbursed. That is below cost. That's why we have problems. And when you add Medicaid and MIP, which mirror how Medicare, how GMH has been reimbursed by Medicare, then that's 46%. And that's the reason why it's important to understand the dynamics of the finances of GMH, how it's been reimbursed. The unreimbursed cost in 1998 was at $487,000. That was the last year GMH was, the rates was rebased. In 2017, unreimbursed is $6.8 million. That's only for Medicare. We have not even factored in Medicaid and MIP. Reimbursement back then in 1998 was 85% of costs. Now in 2017, it's much below that. It's 54%. Next slide, please. This is a slide that we presented also to CMS. This is costs directed at patient care versus overhead costs increase. It's comparing what was the overhead costs in 1998 versus the overhead costs in 2017. The overhead costs in 1998 was 54.48% versus 40.47% in 2017. That's a 26% reduction. The direct patient care cost in 1998 was at 45.52% versus 59.53% in 2017. That's a 31% increase of resources directed to patient care. We have placed a lot of attention and emphasis in improving GMH, and one of the focal points is to address under reimbursements. We have been appealing and meeting with officials for several years now, pushing this effort to address GMH's perennial underpayments and uncompensated care. We have received some successes. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. We have received some successes when 2007 and 2008 adjustments were approved in 2015. An adjustment for 2013 was approved in 2016. If you look at the slide above, the blue line, the blue columns reflects what was the reimbursement for GMH. And then the red column is what shows the adjustment request. That's the request that we're asking for CMS to reimburse GMH. It's additional reimbursement. It's a very technical process, and it's formula driven, and the adjustment still does not address the actual cost of providing that care. And then the green line is, that's the award that we've received already from CMS. That's 2007, 2008, and 2013. We're still, the ones in red, that's the ones that we are still pursuing. From 2009 to 2012, that's over $12 million. And we have been working on trying to get this. For 2014 and 15, we have already received a letter from the intermediary that they've accepted our adjustment request, and it has been submitted to CMS for approval. That was last July. CMS has 180 days to make a decision based on their contractor. And that decision should have come since last December. It's now June, and we still have not received $4.3 million. And that's one of the reasons why I was with the governor about over a week ago, meeting with Region 9, with officials from Washington, Maryland, and also Hawaii calling in. And it was a presentation to push this effort to make a decision, because the statutory deadline has passed and CMS has not made any decision yet. If you look at the blue line all the way up, that is the actual cost of delivering the care. And compare, I mean the purple line, the purple column, and then compare it with the blue line. So there is a significant underpayment. We are providing care below cost. I mean, we're being reimbursed below cost. And that's why we continue, the GMH will continue to have operational shortfall because of this. But we continue to appeal before federal officials to review adjustment and rebasing requests for GMH. This process takes time, and that's what I was told. We appeal to you, our elected officials, to address the perennial shortfall of GMH. Efforts to add exemptions or worse, to repeal dedicated funding to GMH is not supported by GMH. The dedicated funding will enable GMH to address deferred maintenance, antiquated equipment, recruiting doctors and nurses, making timely vendor payments. And as Senator Esteves had mentioned he made an earlier statement that the dedicated money set aside so vendors would want to do business regarding the roads. Well, that's true also for GMH. We will have vendors waiting in line to provide services to GMH, to provide supplies. We saw that when we got the bond money. Everybody wanted to do business with GMH. Well, we did mention back then that that money's not going to last. And we have accumulated payables because the appropriation for 2018 was half of what we got from 2017. Our payables is over $12 million. We owe vendors. We owe a lot of people. We have payroll payables that we have not been able to meet. So senators, please hear the needs of GMH. Whatever you do not forget that GMH cannot be kicked down the road any further. Whether you're going to repeal the sales tax, if that's your desire, but you cannot shy away from addressing the needs of GMH. This is our people. This is the community. Both hospitals need to coexist, because just one hospital alone cannot handle the population of GMH, I mean the population of Guam. Remember when GMH at one point, the PDN, on the very front page, it's code red, code green or whatever? We can't go back to those kind of services. Thank you.
Thank you. We have also Mr. John Carlos, you're up there. Mr. Edward Byrne, Director, are you going to testify? And we have Mayor Rhodes. We have Madam First Lady Joanne Camacho. Please come forward. And one more gentleman here, Will Parkinson, okay. Please come forward, and we'll have you testify before I open the floor for my colleagues to ask questions. So we can wrap up all the testimonies. Oh, perfect. Perfectly lined up. Okay. Okay, we'll start with me, Mr. Carlos. You'll be first, then we'll work our way down. Then you'll be last. All right? You just walk down. All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
At this time, I am not in favor of the repeal of the general sales tax in Guam. My opposition is due to the following reasons. Recent newspaper accounts in Guam published the following. The Department of Revenue and Taxation is late in paying refunds for income taxes. Teachers in primary, middle to high schools nearly averted pay cuts. There is no adequate funding for the maintenance and repairs for public schools. Teachers in the states of West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arizona, and North Carolina went on strike due to inadequate funding for public education. Please see page 37 of the Bloomberg Business Week, which I have attached for your information. Number 2, the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority lacks funding. More than 50% of the patients of GMHC that does not have health insurance are not able to pay the medical charges. This indirectly contributes to higher charges for those who have the capacity to pay or who have health insurance. It is my understanding that the enactment of the 2% sales tax is to provide the required funding for the public schools and the GMHA. The enactment of the 2% sales tax truly averted the lack of funding for public schools. It is my hope that the public educators, students of the public schools, the parents of the students, and the patients of the GMHA truly appreciate that the senators of the 34th Guam legislature are willing to confront the inadequate funding of various programs in the islands of Guam. Taxation is a very emotional subject. It hurts my pocket, and your pocket. Taxation needs to be fair and not unfairly burden those who earn the minimum wages. I do understand that the 2% sales taxes will hurt the pocket of those who earn minimum wages. It must be pointed out that visitors and tourists will contribute to this sales tax as they purchase food and consumer goods in Guam. For this reason, the imposition of 2% sales taxes must be evaluated whether or not public education and public health had been and will continue to be advanced. From the point of view of fairness, I have downloaded the maps of the states that do not impose and those that impose not only sales taxes, but also corporate income taxes and individual state income tax. These state corporate income taxes and individual income taxes are distinct and separate from the United States federal income taxes. The map of the states that imposes some form of vendor's tax or some form of sales taxes is copied from the Tax Foundation website. As you will note, the lowest sales taxes appears to be those of Delaware, Oregon, Montana, and New Hampshire, being zero tax. The sales tax in Alaska is 1.69%, in Hawaii at 4.35%. We are aware that Alaska and Texas generates much revenue from oil production. If we will look at the map, we will notice that in California, the combined state and local sales tax rate is 8.41%. Same thing in Oklahoma, and one of the highest would be in Arizona, which is 9.18%. There are certain states that impose state corporate income tax. This tax is in addition to the U.S. federal income tax. The map of the tax foundation for those states that imposes state corporate taxes is copied and is indicated in this testimony. The states that do not have state income tax include Nevada, Ohio, and Texas, and Washington. Some states also impose state individual income tax, in addition to the U.S. federal income taxes. A map of these states that impose individual income tax is also copied from the Tax Foundation. In California, please note that the state individual income tax is 13.3%. This will help explain the reason why in California the accumulated surplus is more than 13 billion. Given the information from the Tax Foundation, I do believe that the 2% sales tax is reasonable, and in the absence of a source of funding that will replace the corporate tax cuts due to the federal enacted job tax cuts. Repeal is not good at this time. Thank you for being patient with my testimony.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Senator. Senators, my name is Edward Byrne, Director, Department of Administration. I speak in opposition to the repeal of the general sales tax as set forth in Bill 262-34. The reduction in income tax capture brought about by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act caused a potentially serious imbalance in the government's finances. And I think we should note that if income taxes were reduced, taxpayers' disposable income was increased. This imbalance was addressed earlier in the year by a judicious mixture of revenue increases and spending decreases. The revenue side of the equation consisted of a 1% increase in the rate of BPT, estimated to produce between 25 to 30 million. The spending savings was achieved by a budget reduction of 31.5 million. Thus, the ledger was balanced. This bill seeks to roll back the revenue enhancements, which are an essential part of the equation. The ledger will be out of balance if an alternative source of revenue is not identified and realized. Senators have noted that certain tax resources have not been fully exploited. Much debate is centered around the realizability of tax receivables. At the Department of Administration, one of our major concerns is the adequacy of cash flows. I would respectfully remind senators that between mid-February, the date on which the revised reduced income tax withholdings took effect, and May 20th, the date on which the increase in the British privilege tax was realized as a cash receipt, the government operated on reduced funds of a rate of about 8 million a month. This was real. Government programs were impacted. Government expenditures reduced and layoffs were planned because of the shortfall. The general fund was strained. The greatest strain or stress on government finances is uncertainty. With no identified source of dependable and recurrent revenue, the budget is not balanced as far as the general fund is concerned, and GMH is potentially once again plunged into financial distress. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, sir. Madam First Lady.
Half a day and good evening, Senators. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm here as a public servant and also as an individual. Our number one industry for the island of Guam is tourism. And if you ask GVB, it asked its memberships, and it also did an economic impact report, which has not been released, if sales tax will impact tourism. And the answer is yes. Can we afford to have Guam's number one industry be affected with downfall of tourism visits to our island? It will affect sales. Sales will mean having to let go of employees, and the employees not being able to pay their bills. I understand the need for the dedicated funding source for the Guam Memorial Hospital and for DOE. We've implemented the 1% BPT for about a month now or so. Why not consider keeping the BPT of 1% and giving that 1% dedicated to GMH, 75% to GMH and 0.25% to GDOE. If the increased revenue of that 1% is $5 million, that would give GMH 3.75 million a month, and GDOE 1.25 million a month, or 45 million extra a year and 15 million extra a year. How they spend it, they should be able to use it and make sure it's spent wisely and in the appropriate areas. We cannot afford to hurt our tourism industry. I just came back from Manila, and Guam is being promoted as being tax-free. We're already competitive with all the other markets for tourist business. To give that bad image will really taint our island. It's not good. So I really would I'd like to support Senator Nicholas' bill of repealing the sales tax, but also possibly reconsidering keeping the 5% BPT so the government can have some kind of cash flow to help the areas that are in need, like GMH and GDOE. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mary Rhodes.
Hafaday and good evening now. Good evening, Senators, and thank you to our Senator and Chairperson for the Committee for Education, Finance, and Taxation, and the sponsor of the bill for Bill 262-34, Senator Mike Nicholas. Earlier this year, my name is Mary Rhodes. I'm the president for the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, and earlier this year, GHRA did provide testimony regarding Public Law 34-87 and all of the other bills that were considered that were revenue enhancement bills. We didn't address all of the anticipated budget shortfalls and the continued operational deficits that were specifically provided because of GMH and GDOE. We understand the fact that these are services, public services that are necessary, but we strongly feel at GHRA that there are a lot of remedies that can take place and a lot of hard things that we have to look at for better and improved solutions on how to manage our government agencies. I know that we spoke together with the Guam Chamber of Commerce, and that's where we agree that we really should be looking at the adverse impacts of looking at tax increases on what will happen to our economy and with our consumers in mind. So although GHRA could not officially have an official position because of our member survey results, I did provide all of the detailed, all of the data that provided information on how we felt towards the increase of 1% temporary increase to the BPT, also looking at just a regular increase to the BPT, also a conversion, and then a sales tax. One thing was clear, was that we were not for a sales tax. It was really quite split. We do promote ourselves as a duty-free destination, and we strongly felt, and I put out a cautionary tale to everybody, that the fact that we're even considering that and making changes to our tax system without any economic data or studies is actually very reckless and irresponsible. As we've heard in previous testimonies this evening, and as we've already seen in the marketplace, PL 34-87 has already had immediate impacts and changes to the prices and cost of goods and services on the island. In my previous testimony, I implored the legislature as well as the executive branch for a balanced approach and for government accountability to collect all of the outstanding account receivables, reduce our expenses, and to live within our means without further taxation on the people of Guam. By supporting this repeal for Bill 262-34, we will correct a wrong decision that was narrowly made by this legislative body by only one vote. The 34th Guam Legislature should really focus on the cost containment and cost savings measures within government of Guam while focusing on collecting tax revenues, especially while we're conducting budget hearings. This is an opportunity where we can really look at not just where we need to reduce revenues, but also look at what was mandated as part of that public law, such as the fiscal realignment plan, because it did include $30 million in cost-cutting measures. And I know that the governor put out, I believe, $47 million in changes that would be recommended. So I think that's an opportunity to look at those changes and follow up on where those things are at, rather than looking at a sales tax. So those things were actually supported and outlined not only in the fiscal realignment plan, but also supported by a report by the public auditor in late 2017 with specific recommendations to increase manpower with lateral transitions and to find efficiencies within government by preventing any further leakages. With that $30 million in savings, which could be up to $47 million, but with that $30 million in savings, combined with the temporary 1% in the BPT that generates $3 to $5 million a month, that really gets to our initial goal that we set, that this was set out for, which was $60 million. So why did we increase BPT and add a sales tax in the same bill? Why did we do more than what we were asked to do? I provided the results of our member survey again, which showed the effects of those tax increases. And I'm not going to get into all of that because I know we've had a long evening and all of that is public record. And if you want copies of those surveys again, I can provide that to you. I urge our elected leaders to rectify this situation and understand that establishing changes to our current our tax system should be made with a more detailed, analytical, and thorough approach that is supported by sound economic data, analysis, and studies. Not only do we need to allow our businesses and consumers time to adjust to tax changes, we also have covered many, many times the need to have our government agency, Department of Revenue and Taxation, to also be supported and held accountable to do their due diligence to collect before crafting and adopting any new taxes. So thank you for the opportunity to continue to work with you. We truly hope for a more balanced approach and the repeal of this of the sales tax with the approval of this bill 262-34.
Thank you. Mr. Parkinson?
Hello, my name is William Parkinson. Some of you may know me already. I am running for senator, but today I speak to you not as a Democratic candidate, but I speak to you as someone who's managed a small business for the last 6 years and has seen the struggles of the working class firsthand. My family owns a small, modest pawn shop, and I moved home here several years ago to take over management of it. And one of the things I learned in the several years I've been managing it is just how close to the edge so many working class people are living at, just how close to the wire they really are, where even the gentlest of breezes can push them into financial ruin. I'm here to say today that these taxes are not a gentle breeze for the working class. The sales tax is a very regressive tax. And for a lot of them, this is going to be a violent shove because not only are they dealing with this, they are dealing with an increase in utility costs, stagnating wages, and an ever-rising cost of living. Not only is this bad for the people of Guam in the short term, it also sets a dangerous precedent on what we are willing and not willing to accept in the future. I do not want a sales tax on Guam. The tourists do not want a sales tax on Guam. We have lived a long time without a sales tax on Guam. And I hear terms bandied about like temporary and small, but the thing with government is things that start out as temporary and small end up becoming permanent and bloated. Something we also need to consider is we've got a few more years of this Republican president in office, another 2 to 6 years depending on how you look at it. If we don't hold the line now on the sales tax, what happens when this same Republican government decides to give another massive tax cut to the rich and blow another massive hole in our budget? Do we go back to the same well? Are we tempted to go 3, 4, 5, 6? As this gentleman was saying earlier, some states had it as high as 8%. If we go down this road now, we will be stuck with this sales tax forever. Where does it stop? We are trying to saddle the hardworking people of Guam with a new permanent tax for a temporary budget solution. You lawmakers are sitting in a position of power right now and have a real opportunity to show the people of Guam that we hear their concerns and we can provide them with at least some measure of relief in these trying economic times. I believe the best way to make Guam strong is to take care of the people at the very bottom of the economic ladder. Societies are judged by how they treat those with no power and no money. Do we follow an example like England in the post-World War II era, where despite all the devastation and the death and the rebuilding, they chose to make a hard decision and provided all of their citizens with health care? Think about that. In all that devastation, despite things being hard, they still chose to do the right thing for the people at the very bottom. Do we follow that type of example? Or will we choose to double down and continue to put a bigger strain on the people of Guam? Do you want to be remembered as the leaders who chose the easy way out and rose taxes on people who have no power, rather than make a hard decision like give them a living wage so we can expand our tax base and people will not be under such constant strain? Or will we continue to tax our already overstrained people? I know I would choose to side with the people every single time. In this situation, we've got a lot of low-hanging fruit that we need to examine. We have a burgeoning, untapped cannabis tourism market that we can take advantage of. We can explore alternative tax bases that we have not dipped into yet. And as many people have said before, we have collection problems in the millions of dollars that could go a long way towards solving our budget problems. We can find more creative solutions than play tax the poor and let that broken record go on and on. So I implore you to please repeal these taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ladies, gentlemen. My colleagues, I would ask the GMH folks, if you can please just move up. The folks just stay on the table. Just
scoot down.
No, just we'll just get a chair where maybe Mr. Byrne can move down. Yeah, just so we have the. No, Mr. Carlos, just have a seat. Okay. Or is he gonna move down? Okay, so we'll start with. Senator Mike, author of the bill. We'll start with him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, in this continuation of the hearing on the sales tax, we have a lot of emphasis being placed on the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and several scenarios were posited. Several questions were asked. One of them was, what price are we willing to pay, for saving lives at GMH? And I think there's another side to this coin that we really need to examine, and that is, well, what price are you talking about? And the reason why I mentioned that is because the needs of GMH aren't just aren't static, in that the costs within the hospital are something that we need to address in order for us to be able to make sure that we're going to be providing whatever support is necessary. We can inflate those costs to infinity and still come back here and ask the question, well, what price are you willing to pay for the health care of our people? And so it's our duty up here to turn that question back around and ask, well, at what point is the cost that we're paying reasonable? And that is the circumstance that I'm placed in with respect to the management concerns at the hospital. This isn't, by the way, a statement reflecting necessarily the people sitting in those chairs, but it's a question about whether or not we are, in fact, pursuing a policy of containing the cost structures within the hospital as much as possible so that we're able to provide a subsidy that we can afford. And in that vein, there's just several items that I've become aware of that we'll be addressing in our June 11th hearing, Mr. Chairman. Yes, but I did want to address in particular the item that was brought up about a dedicated funding source. And the reality is that GMH did have a dedicated funding source. It's called the Pharmaceutical Fund. As a matter of fact, the Pharmaceutical Fund was established by the current governor when he was a senator. And the Pharmaceutical Fund takes a percentage off the top of GRT and puts it into that fund. And it's supposed to go to GMH. Are the hospital administrators aware of that? Do you know that you already had a dedicated funding source? If we can get it on the record, please.
Yes, sir. We are aware.
And that pharmaceutical fund has, on average, a balance of how much?
Well, the appropriation was for 15 million, but 75% of that is for the matching of Medicaid.
Well,
So
it is
that-
now.
that-
It's
yeah.
for the matching of Medicaid now,
Yes,
but before...
that is not considered subsidy for GMH because that's payment for services. 25% of that was allocated for subsidy. So that's the subsidy that we counted.
But the reality is that that pharmaceutical fund wasn't always going to fund Medicaid. It was actually 100% going to GMH before. Is that correct?
Well, that was, not necessarily because there are clinics that get paid from that match.
I'm not talking about when it's matching Medicaid. I'm talking about prior to when it was being used to match Medicaid. Before then, it was actually before your time, Benita.
Yes, it was before my time, and it was considered a match for Medicaid, so it was not, it was accounting classification. It was considered payment for services, so it was not considered classified as a subsidy. When
So
it
we
was
have-
for payment for services.
We have a $15 million dedicated funding source for GMH in the pharmaceutical fund that's right now being cannibalized into Medicaid. If we were to put that pharmaceutical fund back entirely 100% into GMH, that would alleviate a $15 million problem of the $30 million question. That would cut our shortfall at GMH in half.
So what happens to the matching for Medicaid?
That's, Benita, you are the CFO of the Guam Memorial Hospital. You
No,
are
because
not
you're
the-
mixing two different.
You're not the policymaker for Medicaid.
No, I'm just asking.
And so if we're talking about fully providing the pharmaceutical fund to GMH,
That's fine.
you should
yeah,
be throwing your hands up in
yeah,
celebration.
But then how are you going to address?
That will be a
the-
policy decision by the policymakers, not the CFO of the
that's-
Guam Memorial Hospital.
I-
I would
I'm
like
just-
to
I'm
remind
just-
you to,
yeah.
your job is to advocate only for GMH.
Of course. Why do you think we're here? This is the second set of hearings. We've been here since 5 o'clock.
Right, and
waiting
so-
for our turn.
And so when we're talking about the pharmaceutical fund as a dedicated funding source for GMH, it's something that the hospital administration should embrace.
Yes, of
when we're
course.
having the conversation.
Ms.
Anything that comes to GMH.
Ms. Manglona, this is the
Yes.
legislature, this is our panel, okay?
Okay.
Just answer the question and,
I am. I'm
okay?
I'm
and
trying to
it's not for
answer us,
debate,
yeah.
not for debate, okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you.
And so, Mr. Chairman, in the context of the sales tax, when we're talking about raising it 2% because a certain amount is necessary for GMH, it's these kind of conversations that can help to bring that amount down. And the more we can contain the cost aspect, when Dr. Duenas asks, what price are you willing to pay, the more we can contain what that price is, the less tax burden we can place on our people, and perhaps by providing a full subsidy from the pharmaceutical fund and addressing other revenue items like the Healthy Futures Fund, perhaps getting a greater proportion to GMH. Also increasing the Healthy Futures Fund revenues with tobacco tax stamps is going to bring in more money on that end. There's a very good possibility, Mr. Chairman, that we can address these revenue shortfalls without raising the sales tax. And that's why I'd like to ask the hospital administration, when they come down to testify, it's good to weigh in on policy considerations, but at the same time, look at the big picture and come up with other solutions that you might be able to propose aside from just embracing the one that's in front of you. And on top of that, on the cost aspect of the hospital, it's been brought to my attention, and again, Mr. Chairman will be discussing this at a later date, but it's been brought to my attention that there were different cost structures in the past with respect to how the hospital operated. Contracts were given out with different terms in years prior. That has been different in the years recently, most particularly since around, I believe, 2008. And I understand that there's been some particular questioning with respect to those contracts and some allusions to them. But I just wanted to also put on the table the fact that the administration at GMH could look to the past and see how were you able to make ends meet with different terms back then, and could you apply those same circumstances to the financial situations today. In closing, Mr. Chairman, one of the slides that was mentioned, I don't know if it's able to be pulled up right now, but it was very interesting because it showed two graphs side by side, and one of them had a proportion of overhead that was larger than the other one, and the proportion of direct services, patient services, was smaller. Do you remember that slide, Benita?
That's correct, yes.
Now, could you explain what overhead is in that slide? And if we could have them pull up that slide on the screen, if that's possible. Because what we're looking at on that slide, if you look on the left, I believe that the blue is overhead and the red is direct patient services. And that was what year?
1998.
1998. And so in 1998, the way that graph looks, we were spending more on overhead and less on patient services. And then you fast forward to 2017, and it looks like we're spending less on overhead and more on patient services. So could you explain real quick, Benita, what is overhead in that graph?
Well, and it's the operational expenses, and I'd have to go. I can provide that detailed information because that's just the graph. But in order for us to get to the graph, there's different departments, and each department is allocated a cost.
Right.
So,
now, on the surface, it looks like we cut overhead and we increase patient services, but isn't it true that the way we pay for patient services today in 2017 is very different from the way we paid for patient services back in 1998?
of course, healthcare costs continues to escalate.
I'm not talking about the escalation of healthcare
but
costs. I'm
no,
talking
but
about the way we paid for those services.
let me say something, please. Sure. In 2010, when we became accredited, that was you need to maintain a certain level of expenditure because of the accreditation. There are services that needs to be maintained and provided. So there is a cost to maintaining accreditation. That's why there has been a sustained operating expenditures of over 100 million. And you can look at past audit reports.
So if we could pull that slide up back again so that I can go back to the point that I was making. Now, if we had, for example, a doctor that was an employee of GMH, that doctor would be counted as overhead, right? In this graph?
It depends. If it's administrative, then it's going to be overhead. Some doctors do administrative work.
Okay, let's simplify, or actually let's get more specific. If we had a doctor that was, say, providing surgery in 1998, would that be considered overhead?
That would be patient care.
That would be patient care. And so the cost of that would be on the blue side.
This overhead cost, this is a definition of Medicare. There are criteria that go into calculation of overhead for Medicare purposes.
So when you go into 2017 and you see the patient care numbers rising, that means that we're hiring a lot more doctors and a lot more nurses?
It just means that the cost of there are services that we have provided in 2017 that were not provided in 1998. We didn't have the heart project in 1998. We weren't doing interventional radiology back then. So there have been improvements in patient care, so that's why the cost went up.
Now, the way we pay for those services, though, is not the same as how we paid for services back in 1998, though, is it?
I don't know how 1998 was paid. I wasn't even around.
But then why are you comparing the two if you can't speak to the numbers,
No,
Benita?
because I have figures that were presented. These are numbers that were sent to Medicare.
Okay,
These
so
are
if
numbers
we're-
that we pulled from Medicare.
So if we're going to be bringing numbers before the committee trying to justify a sales tax, so let's make sure that we can speak to the detail behind
No,
those
these
numbers.
these numbers have been validated by Medicare. We were able to get this information from Medicare, from the Medicare cost report.
My question isn't whether or not Medicare can validate these numbers, but whether or not the administration of GMH can validate these numbers with respect to the costs that you're incurring and the sales tax that you're asking for.
I think you're just convoluting the issue.
I think the problem, Mr. Chairman, is that we're dealing with a convolution that's originating from the hospital for the purposes of trying to push a sales tax onto our people.
This is
And that's why
information that
these
was
questions are being
presented to
asked.
CMS, and this has been validated.
Ma'am,
So
you've
we
already
will,
declared that, okay, so.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I also had some questions for Mr. Carlos with respect to the information that you provided. And on your final pages here, you talked about how there are sales taxes in other states, and there's also income taxes in other states. Those are at the state. If you can push your button on the microphone, please.
That's true, Senator.
Now I just wanted to put on the record, though, your information is correct, but what's not reflected here is the fact that Guam keeps all of our federal income taxes.
Guam keeps all of the federal income tax, that's correct, but Guam does not have a separate and distinct individual income tax, as opposed to, if you look at the map in California, the 13.3% is a separate individual income tax, distinct from the U.S. federal income tax.
That's correct, sir, but let's just, so then, on just strictly looking at it from the cost of operating the government, right? So let's look at California. They have here on your very own documents you provided, they have a 13.3% state income tax and a 8.41% combined state and local sales tax for a total,
Yes, Senator.
for a total income and sales tax rate of 18, 19, 20, 21, about 21.7%.
Yes.
When you add the two together. Now here on Guam, the effective tax rate on the federal side that we keep 100% of is about 25% on average.
That's probably accurate.
And then
I'm not into the taxation data. I don't have the data, so
Okay.
that's probably most accurate.
I've seen the data, so it's about 25% when you smooth out the different tax brackets. And then when you add the now 5% GRT on top of that, we have an actual effective tax rate on our people of about 30%, which is 9% more than California. So California's entire state and local government is able to operate with 9% less tax revenue than we're operating here on Guam. When you factor in GRT plus income tax here versus sales tax plus state income tax over there.
I didn't include other components of taxes, which would include property taxes, in terms of comparison, I can give you the map from the tax foundation. The property tax in California compared to the Guam property tax is probably no comparison. My understanding is that for a townhouse in California, with about 100 with about 1,000 square footage would probably pay a tax of 3,000 a year. Compared to Guam, probably, I don't know right now. But if you own a house and lot, the property tax is much lower. So when you compare all of the other taxes, starting just from the state tax, state corporate tax, property tax, sales tax, altogether, the effective tax burden is more than enough to cover their taxation, their expenditure for the government, as opposed to us here, where, like you indicated, all of the federal money from state income tax, from the U.S. federal income tax of at least effective rate of 25% plus a GRT of 6%, that's 31%. I agree with you there. It's not even enough for our island to cover government program expenditures. There might be, if you compare the other tax burdens in the state of California, for example, together with other tax burdens in Guam, there might be some differences. For example, if you take the exemptions given to the hotel, the property tax there, including corporate income tax there, are exempted by virtue of the agreement of the government with those entities. So, in effect, there are some exemptions. I do not question the validity of the exemptions given to the hotels because they do generate employment. There might be some other industries where they do not generate the same kind of employment as much as the hotel does. So when you combine all of those exemptions all together, that's probably the reason why, even though Guam gets all of the U.S. federal income tax, at this point in time, it doesn't appear that we are generating enough to cover the government of Guam expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos, and you're correct. There are a lot of different levers that are being pulled that create all these different distortions. My whole point, Mr. Chairman, and the reason why I use California is because California is actually, I think it is the highest example on the list.
Yes,
and the reason I reference California is because factoring out the property tax and factoring out the exemptions, when you're just talking about the average working person, they're paying for their sales taxes or their GRT, and they're paying for their income taxes. And so just on those two categories alone, we're more expensive than California. And the services that our people receive from our government, don't get me wrong, we have a lot of hardworking people in our government. I don't want to get misquoted here, but we're definitely not at a California standard. You know, and so if we are already putting an income and a cost of living burden on our people that's higher than California, we definitely have a lot of inward looking that we need to do as a government to figure out how we're spending so much and we're not able to pair up with these other jurisdictions. So I just wanted to put all that on the record, Mr. Chairman, because this is in light of the testimony that we received. I do thank everyone for coming out and staying late into the evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Torres.
Very briefly, I just want to ask of Mrs. Camacho and Mrs. Rhodes, you both mentioned price increases as a result of the GRT going up, the BPT going up by 1%. What is the likelihood upon repeal of that in October that those prices will be adjusted downward? And the reason I ask is because there was a suggestion that perhaps that can be maintained and in lieu of a sales tax. That was a proposition that you made as an alternative to maintaining the sales tax. If the sales tax were to stay in place, maintaining it, having a dedicated funding source for GMH. So the question is, all of us are speculating. Many have testified that prices have gone up. So upon repeal, does anything really change? Or the rollback of the GRT, I mean, the rollback of the BPT. What is the likelihood that prices will be adjusted downward?
Well, since I work for DFS, I have to tell you, we did not take prices up because we have to remain competitive with the other markets that we do business in. So it's all vendor related. So we did not take prices up because of BPT. And
was there something in that to that? Was there an effect on the tourism industry in general, the provision of services and goods?
I think what I'm referring to is I think those are general sentiments that there have been examples of just product price increases, and I think you can see that from what Mr. Albert Perez brings out every time with the import data. It's not just, you can't attribute price increases just to the 1% temporary BPT increase. There are a lot of other things. I think Mr. Ken Leongro explained, everybody's dealing with other additional increases, so you can't really attribute it to that one. And I know I said this during my testimony, is that reminded everybody about the whole rollback the last time we did this with the GRT. And that is the reason why I put that cautionary tale out there, is because that's the question, is are businesses going to pull that back? Now, as Ms. Camacho said, is some businesses didn't do it because they have to remain competitive. Also, other businesses might not have because it was a temporary. Why would you go and increase, your menu pricing for only 6 months, even though we know that, at some point the prices will probably just adjust to the market increases depending on different effects it might have. So I don't think that businesses can necessarily say that they increase prices only because of the 1%. I think businesses have been dealing with a lot of other changes. Some businesses are still waiting to see October 1 what's going to happen. And I think that's when you're going to really see prices change. And some businesses don't set pricing like that. Maybe they only do it once every year when contracts change out too. So this is not the time of the year where some businesses would adjust pricing anyway. So the answer really varies across the board of all industries. And I think the other challenge too is with revenue taxation. GRT is declared by the businesses, so how do you prove all of that? So I think that's why it's a slippery slope every time you do this without the real data to track any of it. And I think that's why it's very dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent that was set to do all of this. And I did put out that cautionary tale about, I won't say which business did it, but there were some situations with certain businesses with the whole GRT thing about being visible, GRT versus not. And you won't see the rollback, honestly, because a lot of businesses can adjust accordingly because of increases in import prices with the fuel tax, other taxes that are in effect, so, and increases in utilities and other things. Should the sales tax go through, you're definitely going to see a change in the market, not just in the pricing, but also consumer purchases. And that's going to change the consumer price index and other things. So that's why we're here. We've put out all of the, the red flags during that whole process. And I believe that, we together with Guam Chamber of Commerce really wanted to just really be here as a service to the legislature, to provide information, to work with you on making sure that we make informed decisions. And that is why we're for the repeal, because it was not made with informed decision making.
And I want to also take this time to thank all of you, because what this panel has demonstrated is how divisive this policy is. And there's no doubt that depending on what side of the aisle you align yourself with, they're all valid points and concerns, and that's the hard dilemma that is being made. But because we tend to think of things in so black and white, a cause and an effect, and what your answer has demonstrated is that there is no black and white. And that was why I purposefully asked that question, because a lot of us think that if this, then that, but that's not quite what we're dealing with here. So I just want to say Suzus Masi to all of you, and I know you want to say something, but I just want to make sure I thanked you for being here for over 4 hours now.
Well,
It's
Senator,
much appreciated.
if I may, though, there really has to be a balance, and that's why I'm saying that 1%, and in polling some of the businesses, to keep the 1% or keep it at 5 makes sense because of the Trump decision. So businesses are already getting a tax benefit, a tax break, so they can maintain and run with that 1%, and take that 1% and make it dedicated to the hospital and GDOE. That's $45 million for the hospital and $15 million for GDOE annually. If it's $5 million an increase, if it's $6 million, it's $54 million for the hospital and $18 million for GDOE. So the businesses will probably be more acceptable to that versus having to change their whole business operation and having to deal with sales tax. And it's really going to impact our tourism. I'm just telling you, having 55 years, we've always promoted Guam as being tax-free. Some people may differ in this opinion, but I'm telling you, we polled the markets, and if there is tax, Guam is not going to be a place to come visit. They're going to go to other destinations, and it's going to hurt us. And eventually people are going to be laid off, and we're going to have a very bad economy.
I just wanted to bring back something I asked in my testimony to the legislative body. And the task at hand, no matter how you drill it down, and I know, I worked with John Carlos, he was our insurance commissioner a long time, and no matter how you drill it down to whatever the tax tables are or what GMH needs, the task at hand for the legislature was $60 million. If you held the executive branch and the agencies to cut back $30 million, and with the $30 million expected in 6 months, you've met your goal. So even though it's been a long night, I would still like to see the repeal. I think you've done your job, and you should vote to move this forward. Any other considerations should probably be brought with another session, with another bill to consider. But at this time, I think that this legislative body just needs to hold everybody accountable to show the $30 million in savings in cost savings measures and cost containment, plus more. Go and get collections going, and accept the 6 months of additional revenues that's been generated, and be done with it. You've met the task at hand. You were challenged. You guys did it. I don't know what else there is to discuss.
Thank you. Senator, and nothing. Senator Nelson, ma'am.
Thank you. We still have another $100 million that we have to account for, and we still have to push DRT to collect those taxes, who, by the way, the director is appointed by the executive branch. So please help us and go knock down on their doors too. But I do have a question for GMH. The JCO report was a big concern. We had a roundtable hearing and some of the hearings in addressing the JCO report. And I want to state on a letter from January 19, 2018, and this is from basically the accreditation team. To you, Mr. Peter John Camacho. From Monica Y. Argue, interesting last name. Senior Account Executive, Accreditation Committee Support, Accreditation and Certification Operations. It states just in the beginning, we have completed the findings from January 4 through 5, 2018 on-site validation survey of the hospital program. Based on this review, your survey findings continue to meet the criteria for preliminary denial of accreditation because the organization was not able to demonstrate that corrective action had been implemented for all previous not compliant standards from August 2017 survey. All follow-up activities are summarized in your accreditation report. Please consult your accreditation manual for details about this process. So they have a way, they have basically a book to guide you on how to fix these issues. And a lot of, you replied, I'm sorry, that was not you, that was someone else. But we were asking about this JCO report, and we received so much resistance in acquiring this report. But I wanted to ask, what have you done since then? But maybe I should be more specific. In the evaluation that was not compliant, you had a page and a half, or I'm sorry, a page and 1/4 of a page dedicated to some of the leadership non-compliant standards, which is basically spelling out physicians not participating in mandatory education, policies were not reviewed as revised within the designated time frame required by policy. For example, pain management policy last reviewed and revised since 2014, grievances policy, complaints which required data collected to be reported to the performance. 3 of 3 records did not have RASS assessment for a sedated patient was not completed as required per policy. Emergency medications required to respond to malignant hypothermia or have a response plan for this. So a lot of them are just plans and procedures that needed to be updated. Medical staff leaders could not articulate how they would ensure physicians receive team steps training as required. And I think that this is your job, Mr. Camacho, right? What is your role at GMH?
I'm the Chief Executive Officer.
Okay. So this is your job to ensure that these standards, these policies are met, right? This is, you get with everyone under you and you make sure, hey, we need to do this, right? So out of these items, what have you done?
With regards to
The JCO report specifically for leadership.
After the roundtables that we had held,
Yes.
we went back and we did the corrective action plans.
Okay.
And those were submitted back to Joint Commission as
And
required.
When do you receive a response from them?
We have not heard from them yet.
When do you anticipate to receive a response?
As soon as they get it to us, ma'am, they don't usually give us a...
Well, I think it's important to know because right now, is the hospital accredited?
We're still on that preliminary denial of accreditation,
So
but
you're
we're still accredited.
Okay, so it's a preliminary denial. So it's important to know when are we going to get it back. Have you tried reaching out to them? And is there a process on how you reach out to them? Say, hey, what is the status? Did we meet?
We follow up every so often, ma'am. Yes.
Every so often. Okay. For human resources, staff were unable to identify supplies and medication for malignant hypothermia. Performance appraisal for the personal administrator was not documented since July 2015. That's a big deal. 3 of 3 pharmacy policies were approved by the Director of Pharmacy on the behalf Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee in 2017. However, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee had not functioned since July 2016. So there's a lot of things that are happening that have not been accounted for in the past year or so. And so I guess this comes to the point where the leadership needs to do a better job instead of playing politics and coming here telling us that we should raise the sales tax or keep the sales tax. I think that they need to look at their job first, and you as a CEO is solely responsible for that. And I hope that the next time we come to the table, we can see something more promising in the JCO report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Senator Terlai, Vice Speaker, Acting Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimonies, very helpful. And I didn't vote in favor of this sales tax, so I do support the repeal of it. But I wanted to ask you, Mr. Byrne, since you're representing the Department of Administration, maybe you could give us some of the facts that I think they were projections at the time that this bill was passed. And this is very similar to what Ms. Rhodes has said. At the time, they were predicting a $64 million shortfall in FY18 based on the change in the in the taxes in the United States taxes. Then the plan was to make that up, the shortfall, by cutting $30 million in expenditures, and then bringing in 34 or approximately that in revenues. So have we cut $30 million in expenditures? Are we holding to that expenditure reduction?
The expenditure reduction was a budget reduction of $31.5 million for the remainder of the fiscal year. All the appropriations and allocations were reduced to bring us in line with that.
All right, because there's been a lot of talk about hiring after we were told there was going to be a hiring freeze and things like that. So I'm kind of confused whether after the appropriations were made, those planned reductions were kept in place or not.
We're on track to keep that $31.5 million. You know, that $31.5 million didn't assume a complete hiring freeze because senators yourselves wanted to increase employment at DRT and at some of the public law and order agencies.
Okay, so you say we're holding the line on the 31.5 in expenditure reduction.
As far as we can tell at the moment.
All right,
yes.
and what about, what kind of revenue are you predicting now from the GRT increase, now that you've seen some actual numbers?
Well, we've only had 1 month, and we were predicting somewhere between 5 and 6 million a month for the 1% increase. We actually got, for May, an increase of 6.3 million, but it's 1 month, and I'd be very reluctant to predict a pattern from that.
All right. And so for FY19, do you estimate, could we get by in FY19 with a status quo budget, meaning that we would only factor in that $64 million shortfall, or do you expect a different number?
Well, Senator, in a full year, it's not 64 million, it's more like 110 million, 120 million.
That's what we were told at the time, too. So that's why I'm asking you.
So that
do you still stick with, okay, so what do you predict for FY19?
So that would be very difficult to operate with a deficit of 110 million.
So do you think we should be looking at somehow making up for $100 million either in cuts or in revenue for FY19?
Yes, I mean, in order
and
to
that's
balance the
$100
budget.
million less than the FY18 total appropriations.
It's 110 million less than the
FY17.
The FY17.
Okay, 17, yes.
Revenues.
Revenues. All
Tax
right.
revenues.
All right, that's correct. Okay, so if the 5% GRT was maintained, what would be the total receipts for FY19?
Well,
estimated?
In this current period, it's around about somewhere between 25 and 30 million. So in a full year, it would be around about 60 million, somewhere 56 million.
All right. And do you think the government could cut $40 million in expenditures?
It's already cut 31
It's cut
million.
31.5.
You know, every cut is more difficult to make.
Yes.
I mean, I hear, you know, all the people advocating very, very, very carefully and using very judicious words about cutting government expenditure, but every time you cut, it becomes more and more difficult, and there comes a point when you cut into essential services.
If the sales tax is repealed and the 5% remains in place on the BPT, would you, the government of Guam, be able to afford dedicating part of that to GMH?
You know, but that would be at the to the detriment of the general fund, right? It's the general fund that needs that subsidy. Obviously, GMH also needs revenues too. But you know, my particular issue is to protect the general fund from running out of money, basically.
So if any part of that was dedicated to GMH, you would have to cut more than $40 million to make up for that amount?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes the public hearing on Bill 264, 263, and 262. Correction, for tonight only. For 264, 63, and 62. We'll continue next week on the 11th. But for the other bills, Bill 274, 271, and 270, I will continue to receive testimony up till Friday. And please address those written testimony to the Committee on Education, Finance, Taxation, submitted via email to Senator Joe S. Augustine at gmail.com. My office is located at Rand Care Building, second floor, Suite 3, 761 South Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam. And on Bill 287, that'll be referred back to committee and be relooked at to the exact verbiage that should have been placed. Since Jules Masi for your attendance and participating in tonight's hearing, and for those at home, thank you for watching. Good night.